Hi, it's Dr. Steve from Misericordia University, and welcome to music class week number 4, in which we're going to deal with movement, dance, and learning. In this video, let's consider movement and its link to learning. Then let's consider how to introduce movement in the classroom. Let's look at introducing dance into the classroom. And let's look at two types of dances, content dance and also folk dances. Before we consider movement and dance, let's look at movement and its link to learning. Movement and learning are very linked together, and in fact, movement can support learning. So let's take a look at why and how. The area of the brain that's most associated with motor control is the cerebellum. Now you notice that the cerebellum is located toward the top of the brain stem. Now its location is interesting because the brain stem is the part of the brain, and we share this with other animals, it's the part of the brain that controls autonomic systems. For example, regulating your heart rate, making sure that you're breathing, and basic foundational functions like that in the human body. Now we find that the cerebellum, compared to the rest of the brain, is actually quite small. It represents 1/10 of the brain's volume, but it's very dense. It contains nearly half of all the neurons in the entire brain. Another thing that's interesting, research has suggested that most of these neural circuits, if you will, from the cerebellum are signals that are going out. They're leaving the cerebellum and they're really influencing the rest of the brain. Researchers have traced a neural pathway from the cerebellum back to the parts of the brain that are involved in learning, in memory, in attention, and also in spatial perception. So the part of the brain that processes movement is the same part of the brain that processes learning. We find that movement is very important to learning. Let's consider another part of the human anatomy, the inner ear, known as the vestibular system. When we look at the vestibular and the cerebellum, the cerebellar system is the first sensory system to mature. And when you think about human life, that's really important because your balance is controlled largely through the inner ear organs. So we find that the inner ear's semicircular canals and the vestibular nuclei are information gathering for your movement and your balance. To get technical just for another moment, these inner ear organs, the vestibular nuclei, activate the reticular activating system near the top of the brainstem. Now what this means is that this area is critical to attention because it's regulating the sensory data coming into the brain. So it helps us pay attention, it helps us focus, it helps us keep our balance. And that way we can turn our thoughts into actions and we can also turn them into movements. And that's why the playground activities that stimulate the inner ear, like swinging, rolling, jumping, they're all really important to do because it supports these systems. And these systems, in turn, support learning. Research has documented significant gains by students in attention and in reading from these stimulating activities of jumping and various balance activities, just regular play that students do in a typical playground. Exercise and movement, in addition to helping build our physical bodies, also play some other key roles in human development. Movement strengthens key areas of the brain. It helps to fuel the brain with oxygen to keep it running efficiently and well. And it also stimulates the growth of new neurons, which are so significant and integral to learning. So when you look at it, movement leads to increased cognition, better memory, and also it reduces the likelihood of depression in students. So as you can see, there is a lot of evidence that indicates that movement very positively supports learning. So think about how you can incorporate more movement into your classes. Having considered how movement affects learning, let's look at how we can introduce movement into the classroom. In an earlier class, we mentioned that the Pennsylvania standards call for students to know and be able to use the elements and the principles of different art forms. In terms of dance, talked about energy and force, space and time. In terms of music, duration, intensity, pitch, and timbre, which we've considered. They also talk about principles of dance and music. We've already looked at form and harmony and rhythm and so on in music. Let's now look at dance. Let's look at choreography. It's a big word. It simply means taking different movements and designing them to work together, like to have a way of like a whole sequence of movements to do. And genre, improvisation, style, and technique. We've already considered that there are many benefits of using movement in the classroom. In addition to the ones we mentioned earlier, let's add the ability to develop and stimulate the child's imagination. They can understand the various aspects of music. They can discover how their bodies can be used to create images and feelings and moods. We can definitely strengthen the coordination of gross and fine motor skills and develop better awareness of balance and spatial relationships, and also enhance their self-image. Movement is natural, and children are naturally interested in movement. We find further that the brain seems to be hardwired for a human being to notice movement and to really pay attention to it. So to introduce movement, start by choosing some images, some things that students already know, and let's have them act them out. For example, they see birds flying, animals walk in different ways. For example, within the intensity and the tempo of an elephant walking is a whole lot different than that of a smaller animal like a squirrel. They can walk on hot ground. We can see a soldier marching. Some animals, like frogs, hop. So you can start movement by starting where they're already at, the movement that they have already witnessed, and have them act it out. As you're introducing movement, you could also do some choreography. And again, it's a big word, but what we're really talking about is stringing together a sequence of movements. And those movements, as they're strung together, form a story. One way to do that would be by something called the worm game. The children could pretend that they're worms. What do the worms do throughout the day? Well, we can mimic some of the activities that they themselves will do throughout the day. They wake up, they have some breakfast, maybe they go to school, they brush their teeth. There are various things that they do, and then they end up back at home at the end of the day. So that would be an example of choreographing something and stringing together movements into a story. You can also introduce movement into your classroom by having students experiment with walking motions. You can tap a steady drum beat, and you could use just your hand on a desk, you could clap, you could use a rhythm stick, or we also explored different electronic drum options. As you tap a drum to a steady beat, have the children walk around until you stop the drum. You can lead children by repeating the movements that you want them to follow. So some examples. You could ask them to tiptoe. You can ask them to run. You can ask them to walk. You can ask them to march. You could ask them to gallop. You could have the students experiment with different types of movement. You could play music, and then you could lead the children. You could do things like swing your arms, tap your toes, bob your head, shake your hips. You could clap. So some things can be done in place, or some things can be done by moving about the classroom. You can start and stop the music at different times. Every time the music starts, again, then add something different. Add another element, something to get the children up and moving and trying a new type of movement. A really enjoyable type of movement for young students is to hold a parade with them. You can give children instruments to play. Now, they could be instruments that you purchase, or they could be homemade instruments. As we talked about in our last class, students love to play with things that are common around the house and make instruments out of them. Lead the parade either in your classroom or around the playground. Another great thing is let the children take turns leading the parade as well. They'll feel like $1,000,000, and it will really raise their self-esteem and increase their joy and their engagement in the activity. When we're considering adding movement to our classes, there are two general categories of movement. Activities will either be classified as non-locomotor or locomotor. Non-locomotor refers to students staying in place when they perform these movements. So, for example, they could stretch or sway, they can twist. These movements, they could either stand at their seat, or in some cases, they could be actually remain seated, although in many cases, they're standing. Now, the second classification, a locomotor activity, involves students leaving their seat and they're moving from one place to another. We have simple activities like walking and running, and hopping and leaping, but there are also some complex locomotor activities. When you look at a gallop really involves two different skills, walking and leaping at the same time. When we look at the complex activity of skipping, that really involves walking and also hopping at the same time. So take a look when you're considering locomotor activities, as the ones we've described, which ones are appropriate for the younger ages, and how old does a student have to be to make sure, before you introduce a complex locomotor activity, to make sure that they're really capable of performing that successfully at their age. Before you engage in any locomotor activities in your classroom, you have to prepare the environment for safety. First, ensure that the classroom is free of any obstacles. And we have to watch for things like extension cords, the positioning of the desks. In fact, maybe you'll need to move desks a little bit in order to free up some of those obstacles. Remember that your goal is to have safety, and you don't want to inhibit the freedom of the students to explore movement. Also, you need to establish and enforce rules for the activities in which you're about to engage. Remember that we said that students are going to consider these musical activities as games. Because of that, you're able to control, in terms of classroom management, you'll have more control over how the students are behaving and engaging in the activities and being cooperative with you and listening to rules, because it's a game, and as the teacher, you can shut down the game. And that's That's a big reason for students to listen and to comply with all of your instructions. So definitely establish and then enforce the rules, and keep in mind you can close off the game if you need to. Now let's consider some ways that you can help establish personal space. You can have students stand with their arms extended outward to their sides. Ask them to turn around in a circle, and then you as the teacher can explain this is your personal space for movement. So we don't want anybody to be bumping into each other. This would be one way to help students understand the amount of space that they need to move. Another, maybe more illustrative way to help students understand their area of personal space is to ask children to pretend to blow up a large bubble, large enough for them to get inside. That bubble will represent their personal space. And then tell children to act as if they're floating around the room inside of their bubble, and they're trying to fill up the elephant holes in the classroom. In other words, spaces where no one else is occupying. And this way you can get children to move around without kind of bumping into each other and experiencing any safety hazards. So this is a little more creative way and a more visual way for many students to understand the idea of personal space. Because movement is so important to learning, it's a good idea to incorporate movement at various times throughout the day. You can use movement to start the day, or you could incorporate movement and take a break and allow students to be re-energized. You could do things like lead a series of stretches. You can do windmills with your arms. You can announce different types of movements and be creative and be illustrative and make it clear, like a clear picture for students. Like tell them to reach for the sky, or sway like a tree, or move like a rocking chair does. Remember that you can also incorporate movement as part of transitioning from one activity to another. Instead of having children simply walk from one area of the room to another, you can say, why don't we tiptoe over there? Or if they're about to do some reading time and the story involves, let's say, a cat, maybe you can have them walk like a cat on their paws over to the carpet where they're going to sit and listen to the story. The important thing is be sure to make opportunities to incorporate movement into the daily classroom. To make movement activities even more creative and more fun and engaging for students, some teachers even go as far as using some props. Now, of course, we have to watch when you're using props for safety concerns, but if you have students making streamers out of crepe paper, or if they use a scarf or a ribbon, they could safely engage in these activities just even in their seating area, as long as they're maintaining their personal space. If they used a scarf or a ribbon and they were swaying back and forth or moving their hand in circles, or they moved that prop maybe behind their back and in front of their body as well, again, it just adds a whole other understanding of movement and makes the movement more visual for them. And again, it makes it more fun and engaging. Having considered how to incorporate movement into your classroom, let's now focus specifically on introducing dance into your classroom. So what is dance actually? How would you define it? Well, I like the way Webster's dictionary defines the word dance. As a verb, it refers to performing either alone or with others a rhythmic and patterned succession of steps, usually accompanied by music. As a noun, dance refers to rhythmic movement, and its aim is the creation of visual designs by a series of poses and tracing patterns through space over time. I think they're so colorful. What great descriptions of the movement we call dance. Just as we described and defined music as sound organized in time, we could do the same with dance. Dance is movement that's visually organized, both in space and in time. And the way that a dance is, the type of movement, defines a lot of aspects of that dance, its style, its genre, and also its place in the history of dance. Another aspect of dance is that a dancer's skills and techniques are often based in a particular time period and a particular culture, and maybe based on a tradition, and it's passed down from one generation to the next. And here you can see various types of dance, different genres, from freestyle dance to ballet, Irish step dancing, ballroom dancing, and even tap dancing. Early childhood is an ideal time to introduce children to different styles of dance because they're very eager to explore ways their bodies can move. They're very much open to taking risks and following the cues of others. And they enjoy music, they enjoy singing, they enjoy interacting with others, and they'll enjoy interacting with them on the dance floor. Dance benefits people of all ages in many ways, in physical ways, for social purposes, and emotionally. So think about this. If your students have positive experiences with dance in early childhood, they're more likely to seek out these experiences as they get older. And as they get older, it'll be important physically and socially for meeting people and also for healthy emotions. So the groundwork, the foundation that you lay right now with your early childhood learners will have an impact on them potentially for the rest of their lives. And two more quick benefits of using dance in your curriculum. It provides fun and developmentally appropriate ways for students to develop physical abilities and coordination. And they learn to enjoy physical exercise because normally dance is done with music, which is another fun activity and engaging activity for them. And it also presents an excellent outlet for active children and for kinesthetic learners. It's a great way to get the wiggles out for active kids, and it's a great physical activity for our kinesthetic learners. Another topic that we would like to explore is content dance. Just as we have done with content songs, you can use dance and movement to help teach content, to reinforce content, or to enhance content. So for example, you could introduce information, for example, steps in performing some mathematical process like addition or subtraction. You could do that through content dance, and then you can relate the steps, literally the steps the students have taken, the movement, and then relate it to the steps in actually performing that mathematical operation on paper. You could reinforce content. So just as with content songs, after you teach the content, then you could reinforce it by showing steps in a dance. In our next in-person class meeting, we're going to take a look at some examples and try some content dance and movement to teach language arts and also math. The last type of dance we'll consider in this video is folk dance. There are three types of folk dances. We have circle dances, and as the name suggests, the dancers will be in a circle or maybe two concentric circles. We have line dances, in which case the dancers come together and they're facing each other in two lines. And finally, we have square dances, and that involves four couples of dancers, and then they interact in different ways according to what a caller will sing to them as the music is played. Now, two thoughts. First of all, folk dances allow students a non-threatening way to explore different cultures, which also could involve exploring our culture and our history in this country. So if you are studying a different culture, think about examining some of the dances of that culture. A second thought is realize that even if they historically have been couples of boy-girl, male-female couples, for example, in square dances, realize that in school the couples do not have to be boy-girl. A couple is just two people. For our younger learners, circle dances are really easy to introduce and easy for them to do. It also serves as a transition from the more basic dances to something that would be more complex, that would typically be performed by students in later grades. Again, circle dances, students are in a circle or in two circles, a circle within a circle, and then the caller, or in this case the teacher, will suggest what movements to perform, and sometimes the lyrics of the song that you're performing this dance to will suggest those movements. One thought is make sure that the students know the song before they learn the dance, because otherwise you're going to increase cognitive load and confuse a number of learners. Some of the benefits of specifically folk dances are that they provide an appropriate type of physical activity for active young students. Folk dances also allow teachers to expose students to basic concepts of rhythm and repetition and the various pieces that our state standards suggest that we should be helping students to understand. And finally, two last benefits of folk dance. If you expose children to dances from different countries, from different people from around the world, they'll realize that dances represent different historical times, different social times. They'll see how different cultures and nations and people are connected and interrelated. So how similar everybody is. And at the same time, you'll be able to highlight how unique and special and different the various cultures are as well. And finally, by including folk dance in your classroom, you'll have children looking forward to physical activity and exercise, and you'll help them develop a positive view and disposition toward these activities. At our next in-person class, we'll examine some examples of folk dance, maybe even try our hand at that, or should I say our feet. As a quick review, in this video, we explored dance and movement and learning. We considered how dance and movement in the classroom can energize learners, can help us fulfill academic standards, and it can even help us teach or reinforce content. We found that dance and movement are very much related to learning, and they can improve learning and memory. We explored many benefits of using dance and movement in the classroom. We explored how movement can either be locomotor or non-locomotor, and then we looked at dance, which could be as simple as a circle dance, or we could get more complex, like a line dance or a partner dance. At our next in-person class, we'll explore some of these things in a more hands-on way. Look forward to seeing you at our next class.